Cold air fills the lungs before dawn. Feet sink into red clay that clings persistently. Somewhere in the gray distance, a child coughs, a thin, ragged sound swallowed by the creak of wagon wheels, a murmur of soldiers who do not meet the eyes of the people they guard. A mother presses a blanket around her daughter's shoulders. The ground is soaked from the night's rain. Each step leaves a small, dark print. The story does not begin here, on this road of frozen breath and hollow eyes. It begins decades earlier, when a young republic looked across a vast continent and saw promise shining like gold in a riverbed. This land was not empty. It was home to communities with their own traditions, their own languages, their own sacred places. Among them were the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole communities that farmed, traded, wrote laws. They signed treaties with a government that promised protection, permanence, and peace. But promises can be fragile when they stand in the shadow of hunger and fear. Cotton became king. As settlers pushed deeper into the South, tension grew like a storm on the horizon. Cotton demanded land. Politicians spoke of progress with the confidence of men who believed history itself was on their side. And in 1830, the United States answered that question with a law that carried the cold efficiency of inevitability. Cotton resisted with words, with courts, with appeals to justice. Leaders argued that agreements were sacred commitments. For a moment, the law itself seemed to waver. Rulings affirmed that native nations possessed rights, but law is only as strong as the will to enforce it. And the will was absent. The machinery of removal began to turn, slow at first, then with relentless force. Families were given minutes to gather what they could carry. Doors were left swinging open behind them. Boards were abandoned mid-harvest. Livestock wandered unfenced, as if confused by the sudden silence. They were herded into stockades, crowded enclosures where disease moved faster than hope. The air was thick with summer heat. The winter winds were biting. The waiting felt endless. Then came the marches, long columns stretching beyond the horizon, moving across mountains and rivers, mud that swallowed wagons, and snow that numbed limbs into stillness. Hunger followed closely behind. Rations were meager. Clean water was scarce. Illness spread without mercy, touching the old, the young. Mothers carried infants who would never learn the stories of the last, who held generations of memory, fell by the roadside, their knowledge vanishing with their final breath. There were moments of quiet reflection. Songs hummed softly after nightfall. Prayers whispered, languages that refused to fade, hands clasped in shared grief. Culture traveled even when bodies were driven away. Rivers flowed in directions that led nowhere known. The earth itself felt foreign beneath tired feet. The path west was not a single trail, but many routes converging into one shared memory of suffering. Wagons broke, shoes wore through. Some walked until their legs simply refused to move. Those who died were buried quickly, often without markers, as if the world itself were urged to forget. Yet even in this bleak procession, humanity flickered stubbornly. A father lifting his child onto weary shoulders, a stranger sharing a crust of bread. A song carried softly from one end of the line to the other, scattered hearts into something that still resembled a nation. Survival became an act of resistance. When the survivors finally reached the lands assigned to them, the journey's end did not feel like arrival. Homes had to be built from nothing. Fields had to be cleared again. Grief lingered like a fog. Children were born who knew only the new horizon. but carried the old world in stories, told beside fires at night. For the United States, the removal marked a turning point, cloaked in triumph and shadow. Expansion surged forward. History often remembers victories with clarity and suffering with discomfort. It prefers monuments to confession. Today, the roads of past journeys are traced by highways and towns where daily life unfolds with little awareness. Memory persists in names, in stories, in the quiet resilience of descendants who carry forward languages. The past does not vanish. It waits, patient and persistent, asking to be acknowledged. History is not merely a chapter closed by time. It is a question still whispered across generations. What is a promise worth if it can be broken when inconvenient? And who bears the weight of progress? Imagine that mother again on a cold morning long ago, tightening a blanket around her child as the journey begins. She cannot see the future. She cannot know that her suffering will become. She knows only the road beneath her feet and the love that urges her forward despite the pain. In that moment, history is not an abstraction. It is breath in freezing air. It is footsteps fading into mud. It is footsteps fading into mud. It is a nation's ideals colliding with its actions, leaving scars.